Hi, Angelique, we can't hear you.
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry for that technical error there. Let me start over. Good evening to everyone. I'll be your co-host for tonight. Um, I'm part of GYBN in the Full Members Committee. So let's do a mood check, everyone. From a scale of 1 to 4, how are we all feeling tonight? I'm somewhere in between a 3 and a 4. You could type in the chat which is your spirit animal for tonight. A 4. Very sleepy, a hard day. Solid 2. Okay, okay. Majority is 4, 3, but sometimes 2. Very relatable. A lot of 2s. I might myself be feeling like a 2. So if y'all catch me slipping some words and so on, then I'm feeling like a fish. All right, but yeah, well, it's almost Saturday. So let's also see where you guys are from. Let's see which part of the Caribbean that you're upping and representing. Let's see those in the chat. So you could send the emoji of your flag or yeah, type Guyana. We have a lot of Guyanese here. Up, up. St. Lucia. Very nice. Grenada, yes, yes. Kingston, excellent. So we have a very diverse range here. A lot of Guyanese. Antigua, very nice, very nice. Guyana as well. A lot of Guyanese. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Tamika, you can kindly. Yes, so to start off our event, I'd like to say a big welcome to all as we join together to celebrate World Animal Day this year. So let's start off by saying what it is and why it matters. Well, World Animal Day is celebrated yearly on October the 3rd, and its theme for this year is Save Animals, Save the Planet. Quite catchy and quite simple. And we hope that it reflects the close connection between animal welfare and the health of the environment, which is what tonight's webinar will be mainly about with our present panelists. So this event was first established in 1925, till back there, and has been observed annually in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, patron saint of animals. Another guy needs up in very good. So this day aims to unite people across the world. And we see it's uniting a lot of Caribbean fellows here in efforts to improve the status and treatment of animals, alongside addressing the environmental issues related to this topic of animal welfare, and also look at the importance of biodiversity. So you gotta take a lot of notes. You gotta take a lot of notes for this. Thank you. Next slide. Right. So up to the main course and event for tonight's webinar, our panelists. So we have a wide variety of brilliant panelists that will expound further on this very important topic. So firstly, representing Guyana, Dr. Arianne-Elise Harris. So she's a conservation ecologist and a lecturer at the University of Guyana. Hi, Miss. I don't know if you remember me at Turkine
I do.
campus. And next we'll have Dr. Mark Gibson, a criminologist specialized in wildlife crime. Very unique and very important role. He's also the lead coordinator of the Caribbean Wildlife Enforcement Network, or CAR1 for short, working group. Next, we'll have Ms. Johnella Bradshaw, who is the Redonda Ecosystem Reserve Coordinator at EAG. Lastly, but not least, we'll have Mr. Joshel Wilson, who is the Wildlife Officer and a marine wildlife and conservation biologist at EAG as well. So our theme would be caught in the crossfire, as it states there, wildlife at the intersection of human expansion and trade. So firstly, we will have Dr. Arianne-Elise Harris. Yay! Beautiful photo. Looking right at me. Right. So a bit about Dr. Arianne-Elise Harris. As I said before, she's a lecturer and also a conservation ecologist. In 2013, she pursued an associate degree in environmental science, and by 2025 enrolled at University of Guyana, graduated with her bachelor's in science and biology in 2019. She's also trained as a zoo educator with PAC, the Protected Areas Commission Zoological Park, was the president of UG Biology Club, and was part of the Operation Walse, an international organization that conducts field expeditions around the globe. She's also collaborated with scientists from the US, UK, Australia, and Canada on many projects dealing with human-wildlife coexistence and vertebrate population recovery. It's quite a mouthful. In 2024, Dr. Harris graduated with her PhD and was recently part of a rapid inventory with the Field Museum of Chicago, UG, and PAC. Throughout her career journey so far, she has seen what nature can be if policy is enforced, which is very important, and mindsets are changed, and it has made her determined to help bring change where she can. I'll pass the next slide on to my colleague, Tanika.
All right, so actually we're gonna proceed with Dr. Harris's presentation. So I'm gonna stop sharing so that she can share her presentation. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Um, Let me just start sharing my screen. All right. Uh, okay. Just feel free to chime in if you can't see my screen or see the. But hi, everybody. Good evening. Um, Greetings from Guyana to my Caribbean brothers and sisters from the other islands. Well, not other, but from the islands. Uh, I'm honored and pleased to be part of this event, this webinar, and I'm grateful that it's about a topic that I'm particularly passionate about, which is um, wildlife coexistence or wildlife conflict in response to human evolution and expansion. So I'm happy to share with you on some of my work and my take on this entire thing. Okay, so a little bit about me and my background. So I did a lot of human wildlife conflict work in the North Rupununi territories in my earlier years of research, where I focused on the Black Caiman. And outside of that, I've done a lot of biodiversity assessments. So just looking at just how animals respond in our natural world and respond particularly to disturbances in our natural world. Those disturbances are often caused by us. So, like was mentioned in my introduction, I worked on OPWAL, which is really where I got all of my biodiversity technique training. And then for my PhD, I did something called FIM, which is short for Forest Impact Monitoring. And then most recently, I got to be part of a rapid inventory, which is just a combination of FIM and other vertebrate surveys to really just understand a very large space of forest. Right, so we went to the Accra Quarantine Corridor, which is the southernmost part of Guyana, and we documented the wildlife there. So I was part of the mammals team in charge of documenting both medium to large mammals and also bats. But when it comes to wildlife interactions and how humans have sort of altered that whole relationship that we have with wildlife, we need to acknowledge where the story began. All right, so animals and humans and nature itself has always been very integrated. And when it comes to animals and humans, we've always had a very complex cultural and evolutionary binding that's always revolved around this eat and be eaten natural mindset or natural flow of our world, right? So the greatest threat to humans were other animals, right? So our ancestors would have faced off against things like the saber-toothed cat, wolves, um, even in current day, we still have village territories that face threats from lion prides, Bengal tigers, is something that is maintained throughout history as something that is ingrained within our natural relationship with with the world around us. But just as our greatest threat has been other animals, our greatest protectors have been other animals. So wolves again come into this equation because it's from wolves that we had the domestication of dogs, right? And dogs are called man's best friend for a reason, because the relationship between humans and dogs has always been this sort of master protector situation. So dogs fended off wolf packs from migrating tribes or migrating villages. So when they would stop for the night to sleep, you would have initially wolves being trained to alert the humans when other wolf packs came around. And then over time, from being fed and that reconditioning, you have them being domesticated into dogs. And some of those ancestral traits dogs still hold to this day. And then, interestingly enough, you have mammoth herds. So, mammoth herds, when mammoth herds would cross over tundras and landscapes, human tribes or human migrating groups, they would tend to camp near to where mammoth herds would be because that offered a sense of protection against the predators who would also be stalking these camps. So the closer they were to the mammoth herds, the greater sense of protection they had. So there was a lot of reverence and respect in those relationships because humans understood that they too were as vulnerable as other animals within their natural landscape. So where has that story progressed? So with human intelligence. You had the introduction of technological advances, industrialization, modern medicine, and all of these things culminated to the increase of the human consciousness and intellect. So you had this sort of modernization of how humans saw the world and how they could manipulate the world. And that led to humans becoming the apex predator, or if you don't want to use predator, the apex animal within our natural world, right? We don't have any natural predators. We don't have to fend off ourselves from another animal unless we place ourselves in the circumstance where we need to. So it's not something that can naturally happen to us. It's now become something that we have the choice of putting ourselves in that situation to be predated on. All right. So this sense of this evolutionary switch, scientists will debate to heaven and back about whether it was a blessing or a curse. Most scientists say that it's somewhere in between. And that debate is based around the question, can man live side by side with wildlife? And the reason for that question is because with all of this advancement and urbanization, we're slowly pushing out other wildlife species, and in some cases, we're pushing them to the point of extinction. So we ask the question, can man truly live side by side with wildlife anymore? And what does that relationship look like? So it depends. So every country on the face of this planet has its own interactions with wildlife and its own issues when it comes to development. Most recently in Guyana, we saw the home video of the jaguar um, taking one of the family's dogs. There was the case study in North America whereby coyotes were victimized to the point where their population started decreasing because they were seen as these devil spawns that were taking pets and ducks and rabbits, when really and truly coyotes, they're predators and they feed on these animals as prey. Um, and what happened was, because of urbanization, and we saw the encroachment of suburban houses and homes within coyote territory, the coyotes then started taking domesticated pets. All right. So this whole idea, both the coyote and the jaguar terrorizing this family, is based around this idea of major infrastructural development resulting in habitat loss, and how we address that in our quest to answer the questions, can humans live side by side with animals? And because of the history of that dynamic of what's been happening as the years progress, we're seeing more and more that animals are encroaching now on urbanized spaces because their habitats, their natural habitats, they're either fully degraded, semi-degraded, or it's just easier for them to find food within urbanized habitats. So it's a sort of a bastardized domestication process that could be occurring. So that's how the story's been progressing. So what's the story plot at this point? We don't know. Right? So far we've seen a rapid shift in how humans interact with animals, and but we have not seen that rapid shift in terms of how animals interact with humans. They still will hunt, they still will find food. It's just a case now where they have this new obstacle of this urbanized playground where they have to adapt their already natural behaviors to survive. All right. And then on the human side, we tend to treat animals as other, because we no longer see ourselves like an animal, right? So we no longer see ourselves like a, for example, like a howler monkey troop that has to hurry and find shelter during the night and make sure that snakes don't climb into the tree and prey on the young ones. We don't see ourselves in that context anymore because we've evolved to a point where we can manipulate the world around us to optimize our own comforts. So we see animals as a periphery or something that is occurring around us, as opposed to something that is living side by side with us. And sometimes we do this subconsciously, we don't even realize it. But the harsher part of it is, how does it impact conservation? Now, policies, right? So policies that have been implemented, some of them don't consider the real life natural consequences. And a great example of this was the introduction of the cane toad to Australia to sort of control the pest outbreak that was occurring there in Australia. But what happened was the cane toads grew to a point where they themselves became pests, right? Then you have policies that can disenfranchise human livelihoods. And when we think about protected areas, right? Sometimes protected areas can do more harm than good, because when you think about a protected area, you're thinking about somewhere that does not allow certain activities to take place. Hunting is one of them. And if you have an indigenous community that is located within that protected area, oftentimes you're forming that legislation whereby they now are disenfranchised because they can't hunt for their protein source anymore because it's now deemed illegal. right? So sometimes humans can flip the script and see and only see animals and forget themselves in that equation. And that's where you get that disenfranchising of human livelihoods. But most policies tend to teeter between both. So you'll find policies that are they need to be tweaked, they need to be updated, and they need to have active research in order to better inform them for future iterations because you're going to have this issue occurring, excuse me, time and time again because of the fact that we don't see ourselves as like animals. We see ourselves as other than, so we need to be stewards for animals. So that brings me into my work. So with the human wildlife conflict, like I said, we focused on the black caiman. So this was in 2017, 2018 in North Rupununi territories. And the black caiman is the largest alligator species in South America, with the largest ever recorded growing up to 18 feet. Um, so, of course, with that large of a predator living side by side with North Rupununi communities, you're going to have a lot of human wildlife conflict occurring, and some would consider changing that name to human wildlife coexistence, right? Um, so, what we focused on was understanding human perceptions because we realized that a missing part in trying to address conflict is understanding how humans who live side by side with this animal view it, right? Because that informs a lot of how they react to its presence. So what we found from this project was that villagers, they have their own perceptions and it's going to influence how they view black caiman no matter what. If you tell them that black caiman are apex predators and they control fish populations and they're indicator species, that's all good, but that's all fluff because you're going to be talking to a fisherman who has been unable to feed his family for a week and a half because caimans keep stealing the fish from his nets, right? So they're going to have their own perceptions no matter what you say to them because they're going to say that you aren't living my lived experience with this animal, right? So their perceptions drive a lot of their decision making when it comes to fishing within that territory. And what we found was that a lot of nets, if they had species like lokanani, which is the peacock bass, pirai, which is the piranha, 9 times out of 10, Cayman would steal from those nets. So it wasn't even a case where the Cayman was attacking humans, which is like the Hollywood sort of theme, right? Like big, scary reptilian in the Amazon basin. It's killing people, and it's pulling babies out of their boats. No, it was a case whereby people needed to eat, and the Cayman needed to eat too, and the people didn't like that, right? So conservation policies. So the caiman the black caiman is considered a protected species because of the fact that their populations declined in the 70s, I believe, because of the illegal leather trade, right? So they're protected, so you can kill them, right? But education and awareness campaigns sort of helped in some ways because we got villagers to understand that, the caiman is doing this not to hurt you, but because it also feeds on fish. So we need to come up with strategies to decrease or prevent black caiman from going to your fish nets, right? And in cases where the black caiman learned that if a fisherman is near this area, then there are a lot of fish there. The black caiman's going to be in the area when the fisherman is there, so we can decrease um, instances where you have human attacks, which will further those negative perceptions, right? So education awareness helped in some ways, but it didn't really help solve the issue. So the study itself, it taught us two things: that resource overlap drives a lot of human wildlife conflict in Guyana because in the case of the black caiman, my fish is not your fish, but we both need to eat. And you'd be surprised, a lot of Rupununian villagers, they understood this point, but it still didn't change their negative perception. And overall, it was between a neutral to negative perception of black caiman, but it wasn't very negative to the point whereby they were killing caiman left, right, and center. And I think the fear of legal action influenced that a lot, right? Um, so perceptions play a big part in what humans categorize as a predator or threat. No, it's not a case of having that natural instinct in us to know that I can't go out at night because lions like to prey upon me during this time. It's now a case of I saw the movie Anaconda, and anacondas can eat people, so I don't like anacondas, even though you've never interacted with an anaconda in your life, right? And it's the same. There's the same thing happening in these villages. Even if someone wasn't a fisherman, but they had a friend who was a fisherman, and the fisherman said, I don't like black caiman boy. Like they just always dab out, and they just always going after my net, and they break up my net, and it's costing me money. That leads to a negative perception. So it's no longer a case where you have that interaction between the two species that's driving that negative perception. So the next one was biodiversity assessments. And the one I'm going to touch on tonight is the FIM surveys that I did in Iracrama, where I was assessing bird and bat communities and how they responded to selective logging. So selective logging it's a sustainable alternative to conventional logging. So conventional logging is just where you just clear cut the entire forest. Selective logging has a little bit more selection in that process, and it focuses on key species for the timber industry. So it leaves the overall forest stand intact. Now, when this was implemented, legislators thought, yeah, this is a perfect setup. We're going to save the trees. We're going to save all the birds and all the bees, and we'll still be able to make a profit. Um, so what I did was I went into this logged rainforest and I collected data over the span of a year and a half. And my data represented 10 years after logging had stopped. And when I compared it to data that was collected during and before logging even started, there was a lot of variable changes in the populations that I was observing. And in a nutshell, what this was saying was that some species stayed and some species still left, right? So what we narrowed this down to was that specialist species, so birds and bats that have very niche requirements in terms of what they eat, in terms of where they live, in terms of how often they mate, those specialist species, they have a harder time adapting regardless of how selective you are with your disturbance type. So you can have the good news was that you still had a large amount of the overall vertebrate population remaining in your forest, but it now came down to these specific groups of species that were still leaving. And the next part of our question is understanding why, you know? So in a nutshell, what we essentially said was that selective logging was great because it allowed us to understand how nature itself reacts to different intensities or pressures of disturbance. There's a common misconception that as soon as you alter something, everything's going to die, everything's going to leave, when in actuality, nature's natural embedded evolutionary instinct is to adapt. So before anything goes extinct, it will try to adapt, and you have extinction happening because the rate of adaptation is not matching the rate of disturbance or the rate of change in the environment. So the organism doesn't have enough time to adapt. So selective logging was introduced as this method to sort of bridge that gap and allow species to have a little bit of a breathing room whereby you have a win-win situation where humans can still extract timber for their expansion projects and infrastructural development, but you don't have your community structure of your wildlife being depleted. But some will stay and some will go. So this introduced this concept of extinction debt. So extinction debt is basically where you have a disturbance happening and you don't see the negative impacts until years later. And that's the scary thing about nature as well, because you can go either way with it. And humans in our short time being the evolutionary kingpins of our environment, we're still trying to understand this. And some scientists believe that it might be too late. So this brings us to this idea of resilience and modernization. Now, I like using the symbolism of the pigeon nest. So pigeons, like dogs, they have a deep history with humans. They were used as messengers, right? So carrier pigeons, they would send mail to from one person to another. Long before iPhone was even a concept. So when we modernize how we communicate, pigeons were sort of just left, okay, well, I don't really know what else to do, right? And they had been bred to the point where they were always accustomed to being in roosts and being in human-made structures that now they were left on their own and they were sort of abandoned and they had no sort of concept of how to create a nest. So they're notoriously bad at building nests. Some will just lay their egg on concrete and put a few twigs in between, right? So I like using the pigeon nest as a symbolism of the adaptation struggle that many animals face in our modernizing world. Resilience to modernization comes with the caveat that an animal they have the evolutionary capabilities or the evolutionary cheat codes to adapt fast enough. And some animals do, some animals don't. And that's where this sort of pigeon nest idea comes in because it's either you'll be great adapting to your changing world, or like the pigeon, you're going to be left with your hands in your pockets and realizing, well, I don't really know what to do. And this is where strength in partnerships come in. So you will have these situations where some animals are struggling to catch up with with humans and their rapid revolutionary implementations in our world. And partnerships become important because humans have realized that, hey, we're doing more harm than good if we don't do something about these deficits that are happening. So in Guyana, you have things like the Upakari Cayman House, which has a wildlife festival every year to educate the public about not only cayman species, but about river turtles and the importance of maintaining these species in our communities despite how we might personally feel about them. And then you have things like the Forest Stewardship Council, which oversees logging practices in Irukama to make sure that they are not teetering or going outside of that very strict yellow tape of what they can and cannot do within a rainforest area, because they realize that biodiversity is so fragile and you can still have negative impacts even if you're doing everything quote unquote the right way. And then, of course, you have places like the CSBD, right there at the university, housing the nation's scientific database in the form of specimens for study, for advancement of knowledge about these species, to apply lessons learned so that we don't repeat the mistakes that we've made in the past. Field museums, protected areas commission. So all of these agencies work hand in hand and form these partnerships to ensure that the overall goal is that we don't lose biodiversity at the rate that we have been losing it anymore. So where does the story end? That depends on our mindset. And this is the biggest part in this answering this question of what does that relationship look like between humans and animals. Our mindset is what is the sore thumb in this equation, because of the fact that whether it's negative perceptions, whether it is wanting online attention, wanting praise within our communities, or just wanting economic gain, right? Mindsets have influenced how Guyanese respond to wildlife presence within their own backyards and also in other places. And it's an interesting dynamic to observe because Guyana has been a game changer um, in its conservation strategies. We just had the Biodiversity Summit back in July. And all of these all of these fantastic scientists and these fantastic ideas and implementing the carbon credits and biodiversity credits and understanding all of these ecologists that are advocates for wildlife protection, but you still have these things happening. You still have people killing jaguars, you still have people slaughtering snakes as soon as they see it. You still have people slaughtering shorebirds and selling the meat, even though shorebirds are migratory species, so they don't actually live here. So our mindset is what we need to change if we want to ensure that the efforts we're making to conserve biodiversity actually work. And then, of course, we have the bigger threat, which is climate change. And that is a whole other ball game, but it's always at the back of our minds. But just to think about the cost of modernization for wildlife is they now have to adapt to changes that we're making on top of adapting to climate change side by side. And unfortunately, we're seeing an even faster decline in our wildlife species and a lot of charismatic wildlife species as well. So we're here again. Where does the story conclude? And I think I've done my part in trying to tell you where we are with the story right now. So I pose this question to you guys to think about: where does the story conclude? And where do you want to see it conclude? Because that's what matters the most, not just for you, but for your children and your children's children afterwards. And that's it for me.
Thank, thank you, Dr. Harris. Wonderful presentation. I was really glad to hear some of the points that you mentioned, like very, very crucial to our times, like especially with
Thank you.
expanding development, very crucial. Now, does anyone have any questions relating to Dr. Harris' presentation? You could put your questions in the chat. Yes, I do agree. Very interesting.
I see John has his hand up.
Hi, good night. I just have one question.
Hmm.
You said that there's the selective logging, they look for specific species, right?
Hmm.
Is there a reforestation program for the selective logging just to prevent the overexploitation of one species that may have certain ecosystem benefits?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So in Iracrama specifically, they have a somewhat of a reforestation program, but what they do is in following FSC guidelines, once they've finished logging a plot or a subdivided area of forest, what they'll do afterwards is they'll completely leave it alone so that you have a natural regeneration occurring. All right. So the FSC regulation stipulates you have a 60-year cycle. So they won't return to that plot for 60 years so that you can allow some of those emergent species to regrow.
Oh, okay, that's great.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Okay,
So
thank you.
when this study was conducted, it was in the first plot that they started harvesting. So when I came back in, I was doing data collection in that plot that was currently being regenerated. And you'd be surprised how fast those trees start growing.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. That's amazing.
No
I love to
problem.
hear that.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions to give to Dr. Harris? Give it a minute. If not, after a minute, we'll move on to the next presenter on the panel. Right.
Okay, thank you
But that
guys.
was a very good question. Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next presenter, which is Dr. Mark Gibson. So, Dr. Gibson is the Initiatives Director at Sustainable Innovation Initiatives, a U.S. and Trinidad and Tobago-based nonprofit organization, and he serves as the lead coordinator of the Caribbean Wildlife Enforcement Network Working Group. A criminologist specializing in wildlife crime, Mark brings over 15 years of experience to criminological research and sustainable development across Latin America and the Caribbean. He holds a PhD in criminal justice from Michigan State University and a master's degree in international affairs and economics from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Mark Gibson. Dr. Gibson, you can start sharing.
Great. Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, I think before I just go to screen share, first I will just say thank you very much for having me. I very much appreciate it. I especially resonate with this theme. Um, I think reading aloud earlier, it was save the animals, save the planet, something to this effect. And that's actually very much something that I work as. Like that's kind of my basic model. So it's kind of fun to be able to speak to this. And I guess what I mean by that is I really think of myself working in sustainable development. And yet I end up working mostly on wildlife, right? But I think there's a lot of good to come of that, and there is a lot of truth that if we can find ways to save these animals, that it's easy for us to find an emotional connection to, maybe the other stuff could follow, right? That's kind of the hope. Um, Second, I will say I hope I did not misunderstand the assignment. I have pulled a few slides together. I will say I am not a master slide maker, but I will show them nonetheless. Basically, I just talk a little bit about my background, how I got into this. I'll showcase a few things that we're working on now that my partners and I are pretty excited about. And so maybe what I'll just also frame this is maybe a third point is I hope this is just a good hello and start to the conversation. Our model that we work on now at SII is very much open collaboration, and we realize we need to foster the activist community as much as engage on substantive issues. So we try to operate with a very open model, and yeah, I'll share a little bit more about that. All right, so let's go to some Canva presentation. All right, so really, I'm just going to talk a little bit looking back and looking forward. I just theme my slides kind of around some of the main content that I saw to speak to. So, I really don't usually insert myself. I'm not a person who usually takes photos. I have to have my arm twisted. I'm not usually the guy who wants to put my personality on here, but I am aware that I am a wildlife criminologist, and there are not many people who do that in the world. So you can, I suppose, take this as a limited case study and what sort of crazy people end up doing this sort of thing. I grew up as a nomad with very international family. My father from Ireland, my mother American, but Spanish descent. And we moved around every 4 years or less. And so there's something in that I think that allows me to work more internationally. I will say there's some unusual upbringing at play. And also, I've also just been very values driven, like a neurotic little kid writing poetry about the woes of the world and, fast forward to eventually getting, a PhD in criminology and working master's in international affairs. And then I've really just been working in sustainable development since 2005, since I finished my undergrad. And it's taken different forms. And then really today, probably the most notable role I have is as coordinator of the Caribbean Wildlife Enforcement Network Initiative. currently in a working group form. It's pretty cool. I'll show some things on that. But we currently benefit with we have 25 governments participating, which is kind of cool because it makes us the newest wildlife enforcement network in the world, and also one of the biggest, if not the biggest. So yeah, we're pretty excited about that. Just some photos I pulled out. I do not do too many photos, but just to show, I've always been really big into nature. A lot of my PhD work was with turtle poaching in Nicaragua. I've led study abroad, taught courses on biodiversity conservation, Madagascar, and I have for extended periods decided to just be a salty dive master off a boat in Nicaragua and Honduras and do nothing. And I have definitely done that at periods of my life. But I've always been really passionate about natural world. I've also mentioning just being very values motivated. I've always put my money where my mouth is, right? Right from the beginning. So when I wanted to get into sustainable development, I chose to pick some of the hardest projects I could, to learn as much as I could. So this is still something very dear to me. Project of work in Guatemala. These and my colleagues from Europe, we were human shields. And we were going around exhuming mass graves from the Civil War in Guatemala, and which is pretty gnarly, yes. And also, because you're there, you can work with the forensic anthropologists and the lawyers and everyone, and you can learn everything about doing a project like this, or maybe ideally in the long term, something a little less risky. But yeah, that was essentially what I did right after college, and I took that forward, eventually getting out of kind of the really hairy social justice sort of projects, and finding more love for nature conservation. And so I went to grad school and eventually came out and I worked at a group called Pew Charitable Trusts and WWF, which you might more know in DC. And then eventually went for my PhD and started building projects more in field-based conservation and getting back more into classic criminology. And just some pictures along the way, like just showing what that has looked like in this weird career. I've done everything from aquaculture, private sector initiatives in Peru, to hanging out with celebrity Ted Danson on Capitol Hill, to sleeping on fishing boats in Ecuador, tracking down turtle poachers, and even dressing up as a deep sea fish at the United Nations once. That was the highlight. But it's been a strange career, and yet, it all has this tie together, which is how do I learn about advocacy, or more popular advocacy versus, models or methods or finding communities along the way. And so these things have really tied together, I suppose you could say, to where I am today. So a few links I will click. This is our tiny little NGO. If you guys ever find this sort of work interesting, sometimes we have paid gigs. We do sometimes also take volunteers. Not to say that's the best decision for everyone or anyone, but we mainly work on different highly collaborative initiatives. Nurture Nature in Trinidad, though dormant now thanks to the U.S. foreign policy changes, but also Carwen, Songbirds, and Nigel, my NGO partner, has long worked on Trinidad ocelots and Caribbean sharks and other things. So here's one website, if you're wondering what the heck are we doing. But this is all highly, highly collaborative. This is all a few people leveraging much, much larger networks. And so what does that look like? Here's the Carwen, which this website is not live. It will launch. Uh, Anyone can look at it, actually. I'll give you the password if you want. It's open for feedback, but this will launch later this month. So this is the Caribbean Wildlife Enforcement Network, currently with 25 governments participating. United Kingdom just joined this past week. We meet every 2 months and we build projects. and we do projects. So like I'm currently in Jamaica planning a rapid assessment to help them tackle the illegal pet trade, which has now taken off in the past year. So Carwen is great, but yeah, this is just one more example. The project that's most near and dear to my heart is the one that's most dormant because we have been defunded twice by the same person, but at different time periods. And yeah, it's hard to get funding just for national level work in the Caribbean. So this is something that we maintain our community and we look forward to tackling. This is all about the pet wildlife trade. But it will be back. Here's another initiative that we work on, neotropical songbirds. This has about 30 international NGOs working on it. This is a huge issue that's not really addressed, has a huge trafficking component. And this will also launch probably later sometime this year, if not early next year. But all of these initiatives still have large civil society groups or large governmental groups participating in regular meetings, and we have lots of plans and projects. Some are doing very well, and others, you take hits, and there's a lot of instability in doing this. But the potential is still there. So challenges, opportunities, yeah, funding gaps as ever. And yet there are so many new donor communities currently and in the future. And a lot of that is reaching new audiences, finding new ways to storytell. I'm a big believer. Yes, things are a little rough right now globally with US foreign policy change. It's hard to quantify it, but it's large amounts of money that was there is not there for environmental work, wildlife crime work. And yet these are issues that people connect with if you story tell well. So challenges, opportunities. Uh, Another challenge, lack of connectivity with skilled professionals. There are not many people who do wildlife crime work. Um, and maybe for good reason. I don't know. It is a little crazy, but if I think the flip side though is we are slowly finding more skilled professionals, people getting degrees, being trained in the more rigorous methods. But there's also something to be said for just having savvy volunteers, and having done projects in the past, like in Trinidad, and I worked with a lot of local uh, master's students and undergrad students from UE, and not saying it was a slam, it was like just a perfect fit for every person, but there were folks in there that were every bit as good as, a far more trained person from an elite program. Some of this is just finding people who have skill. Um, Another challenge, of course, in the Caribbean is how fragmented it is. I mean, just literally, right? As small island states, and yet the fact that people are more comfortable, at least to some extent, with transnational existence means there's more potential for finding those bigger collaborative networks, I find, than if you were in, say, South America or Central America even. So that's why I get really excited about collaborative networks like that we build. And then as ever, I guess I was just really big picture and thinking about challenges and opportunities. As ever, it is a terrifying ecological crisis unfolding before all of us, just as the world seems to be getting crazier and crazier, just in terms of peace and social justice. So I guess I don't really know what the opportunity is beyond some sort of radical social change. We need leaders. We need to find new models and new ways of working and practicing governance. And so I don't really have the answer there, but I hope one day I can work with folks like you and find a little bit more of that solution. So those are my slides, and I'm very happy to take questions. And hopefully that was a little bit interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Gibson. We have some questions in the chat actually. So the first
Okay.
one is from
Yeah, let's see.
Chauncey is asking, how can one volunteer with your projects of particular Kawen? And then Bianca. Well,
Yeah.
you can answer Chauncey's and then answer Bianca's after.
Yeah. That's a great question. We are so new that we have no policy. Um, I guess being the main sort of technical person, a lot of it's tricky. You're inevitably teaching people, but you have to figure out if, hopefully they could contribute in a meaningful way right off the bat. So I think uh there could be potential for volunteering for the right people or the right sort of work. I haven't really thought through yet what that could look like. Simply because I mean we're really building the plane as we go down the runway. But I would say if you find this sort of thing interesting, and I would say some key skills. I mean, being very literal to key skills right now that would like really change my life and for the better. Um, Coding, actually. Data management has gotten to a point where we're already working on a solution for a full stack database, which has as much back end coding as front end coding. Um, Technical writing, technical design, like we're building out technical components to a rapid assessment toolkit. Being in the field and doing the stuff that actually sounds way cooler is actually a small fraction of the time. Most of it is like sitting in front of a laptop and getting a little bit less in shape. Um, we do have time-bound projects in certain countries. Like we're going to do something here in Jamaica. We might be doing a few more projects in the future. But it really depends. And it'll be like not until the moment we're ready, because that's how decisions get made, apparently. But I'd say if you have an interest and you have some possible skills in terms of writing or coding or field work, let us know. But yeah, it wouldn't be like an entry level volunteer thing, just because the seriousness of the subject matter under study. I hope I answered that all right. I would love to be able to say there were really immediate, easy opportunities, but it's just the nature of this. But yeah, let's see. I do see some other questions. So, do you consider the illegal pet trade to be under-researched in the Caribbean? Where can one find data on the illegal pet trade in the Caribbean? Nice. I feel like you're throwing me a softball. Thank you. Hugely under-researched. Hugely under-researched. Um, and yet, with minimal effort, you could map a lot of the issues, right? With the right social engagement, let's say. Um, we know illegal wildlife trade is big in quite a few countries. Throughout island Caribbean, continental Caribbean, for instance, Amazon parrot keeping, um, the sort of like traditional pet that is kept that is kind of normalized but is oftentimes still illegal. Um, that we know it happens everywhere. But have we ever done a study, for instance, showing the average life expectancy, which would probably really spur policy, in my opinion. We know they die at a fraction of their proper lifespan because all they get is like sunflower seeds. But that sort of research angle, obvious low-hanging fruit. And that's what I kind of just feel all the time is we know there's a lot of general problems and it's not that hard, but it's undocumented. And then a lot of like the really interesting strategic questions really just aren't looked at. And I don't give that as a critique of the research community. I think there's just so little funds for that ever. So yeah, where can one find more data on the illegal pet trade? It's limited, and it's often about piecing things together. I think there was just a report this past year, probably the most recent one, from IFAW on illegal wildlife trade in the. It had a kind of an odd designation, but it was like Hispanic America, but it really doesn't cover most of the Caribbean. Um, yeah, and if you look at wildlife crime in general, like the UNODC, I love to pick on the UNODC after they did this. They published their World Wildlife Crime Report in 2024. Uh, there's only two mentions of the Caribbean, and that's because it's one figure that's been reproduced. And the whole figure's point is to say that they basically have no data from the Caribbean and they misspelled Caribbean. Like, ugh, it's like one R, two B's, guys. So like globally, there's just nothing, nothing. It's just nothing. So we have to be strategic. That's one big motivation for us right now. Like we're building everything we do right now in terms of a rapid assessment toolkit. And we want to be able to release that so any government agency or NGO, in theory, could go from step A to step Z and do a full project, even if it's something small, but do it in a way that's meaningful. So, yeah, we're trying to foster it how we can, but funding is probably the biggest limitation. What is the process for other Caribbean countries to join the CAR? When? They just have to want to join. We are not yet a formal wildlife enforcement network. We're getting there. We actually are doing all the diplomatic outreach. Pretty bonkers to do outreach over 3 months to 47 different governments on a memorandum of understanding draft. Uh, it actually went far better than I thought. And that's when once that gets fully signed, that's when then it'll take a signature on that document to fully incorporate. Until then, we are a quasi-legal entity, as apparently is standard for building these things. I didn't make up the rules. I just looked at the case studies. So no one has a problem with this. But yeah, it's essentially if there's a government agency in your country, or you are with a government agency in your country and you would like to join, we welcome you. And you might, for instance, want to ask for approval from your boss not to get in trouble. And that's also something we can facilitate. Send like a nice invitation letter. Our leadership are, proper influential folks. One's a Bahamian naval commander. Another's a Trinidadian CITES scientific authority. So we can facilitate that. So our ambition is to get all 47 countries, although probably realistically that will be hard until we change geopolitics, but we would probably be able to get most of them. So there you go. Yeah, thank you. I have run out of questions, so I will pause there.
Okay, very, very good segment, and thank you for your interaction with the members. They appreciate it and well received.
Cheers. Cheers all.
So
Yeah.
now we're going to go on to the last two panelists, which will be presenting together, but I will introduce them separately. 1 second. All right, so our last two panelists are Ms. Johnella Bradshaw and Mr. Joshel Wilson. So starting with Johnella, Ms. Bradshaw is an enthusiastic young environmentalist, presently serving as the Redundant Ecosystem Reserve Coordinator at the Environmental Awareness Group, or the EAG, in Antigua and Barbuda, managing one of the largest marine protected areas in the Eastern Caribbean. Johnella holds a master's in environmental studies and sustainability management and is passionate about island conservation, protected area management, island sustainability, and disaster risk resilience within small island developing states. She believes that effective change starts from a local perspective through mobilizing communities, organizations, and institutions. Johnella strives to inspire others to become positive agents of change and longstanding environmental stewards. And Mr. Joshel Wilson is a marine wildlife and conservation biologist with a minor in veterinary science and dedicated advocate for Caribbean biodiversity. His career started with the rediscovery and morphological study of the critically endangered Grenada bark blind snake. Since 2021, he has served as wildlife officer at the Environmental Awareness Group, or the EAG, leading biodiversity monitoring, educational and outreach programs, and serving as principal investigator for the Antigua Racer Conservation Action Plan. With experience spanning snake husbandry, shark tagging, sea turtle conservation, bird conservation, and invasive species management, he brings hands-on expertise and leadership to conservation, committed to safeguarding endangered species and vulnerable ecosystems. So Johnella and Joshel, you guys can present now. I will start presenting.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Tamika, for that lovely introduction. I think Janella is going to start us off for the night.
Okay, great. Just making sure everybody can see the screen. Why can't I see the screen? Okay, awesome. So, hi everyone. We are excited to be here and to be included in this series focusing on biodiversity and to be discussing more about wildlife and human expansion trade. I know the theme said caught in the wildfire, but we'll be presenting on out of the wildfire, focusing on Redonda and rewilding islands after the invasion. So first of all, who are we? Like, who are these two people talking to you today? I'm gonna let Josh start, give his introduction.
Thanks, Joe. So I think Tamika said it pretty well about introducing me. I think it covers pretty much what I've done in a short span of my lifetime, probably between 6 to 8 years now. I've been a big advocate for conservation and also rewilding of either ecosystems or reintroduction of species. So my job literally right now is to actually manage the reintroduction and the population and ecosystem of the critically endangered Antiguan racer on 4 different offshore islands. So making sure that management decisions right now are positive for increasing the population because we're trying to get it out of the critically endangered rank to more more to the endangered to probably vulnerable or probably threatened. We have been doing a lot of on the ground work, a lot of legislation, interacting with governments, doing all those things. So one of the things that I love to do is actually get out and actually do outreach and education, which is good in a sense that you want to make sure that your public is aware of the work that you're doing, while also not feeling scared of knowing the types of their environment itself, educating them on what they have. So instead of you as a scientist, you as a person who've done biology is the only one caring about this, you want other people who are not within that same field to care, so you have that support and backing. So outreach and education is a big thing. Another thing for me would be just interacting with our partners as well. So one thing that we do is actually interact with our partners in different islands and different countries, ensuring that the methodologies that we're doing within the work that we're doing right now is actually sound and actually makes a difference. So some of the things that I do is actually interact with companies, probably in the UK, like Doral Wildlife Conservation Trust, who actually ask us to actually be part of their management and protocol decision making. So creating protocols is something that we do as well. And this picture on your right that you're seeing is me tagging the world's rarest snake, the St. Lucia racer. That's pretty much about me. And I think Tamika said majority of the things already. And my background is just wibbly wobbly, but I enjoy the work that I'm doing right now. And I'm sure tonight I could probably give some insights to some things that are going on within Antigua and Barbuda.
Great. So just a little bit about me. I am an environmental scientist with a love for both wildlife and people. I currently work within conservation as the Redonda Ecosystem Reserve, which is a large marine protected area, both covering terrestrial and marine area for Antigua and Barbuda. So that just involves a lot of things. So from monitoring, from governance, management, from doing biosecurity checks, public outreach, awareness, letting people know about the protected area, why it matters, heritage, everything that falls under establishing this new protected area is my responsibility. Also, I am a person that I love to be outdoor. I think that's the favorite part about my job. Sadly, the field days aren't that many, but when they are, I do capitalize on it. And although my position and my job focuses on Redondo with working in my organization, it also allows me to work with other species. As Josh was talking about the Antiguan racer, we have a turtle program. We get to learn different skills. So right now you're seeing a picture of me banding a bird. We get to learn how to fly drones and use drones for monitoring. So I really love that aspect of our work and growing our capacity overall. And I think for me, I am an introvert, although a lot of people don't believe that. For my job, I do have to display extroverted tendencies, but outside of when I'm not working, I keep to myself. But despite that, I just want to make conservation everybody's business. We depend on our environment for our survival, and we all have a role to play. All right, so who do we work for? You learned a little bit about ourselves. Now we're going to tell you about our organization. So we work for a great group called the Environmental Awareness Group, as you heard before, EAG, which is Antigua and Barbuda's oldest environmental NGO. And we have been doing this work, being at the forefront of conservation for over 30 years. So maybe some of y'all on this call are not even 30, and that is great for you. And maybe there are some people who are above 30, and God bless you too. Amen. However, the aim of our organization is just to make sure we have a society where everybody cares, values, loves, and protect the wildlife of Antigua, Barbuda, and Redonda. And despite us being in the game of conservation and doing science, we really believe that our work should be worthwhile, meaningful, impactful, and also satisfying with a hint of adventure. So everything with EAG, we make sure that people are engaging in citizen science and having fun whilst doing that. So I'm just going to hand over back to Josh, and he's going to, give us the Caribbean context on our theme tonight, talking about wildlife at the intersection of human expansion and trade.
Okay, so just a disclaimer before we begin. I'm no expert like Dr. Gibson on this. All right, I've attended one of his presentations earlier this week, and I was very blown away by it. And it's something that resonates with me. Some part of my background is dealing with human wildlife conflict. All right, so that's something that I'm really interested in. But Johnella had asked a question to Dr. Gibson. I think tonight she's probably going to get that answer because it's probably something that probably our organization doesn't know, and it's something that happens regularly. So as Dr. Gibson said, that there's a lot of wildlife trafficking that happens in the Caribbean, and that's true. It's a serious problem. It's not documented. We have a lack of data. There's no capacity, meaning that some organizations don't have either the resources, the personnel, the money, or any type of legislation put in place. However, Antigua and Barbuda does have that legislation put in place, and they do interact right now with the Regional Wildlife Enforcement Initiative through the Caribbean Protected Areas Gateway, which is part of a biopalma project. Funny enough, EAG is the actual leading entity under that project that the Department of Environment has put since we've been doing environmental work for over 30 years within Antigua, Barbuda, and Redonda, right? So it's a shock to us, right? We weren't even told that we're supposed to be the leading wildlife enforcement personnel for the Department of Environment. But that makes a lot of sense for us, especially when it comes to the human wildlife conflict, especially with snakes. That happens a lot. It happens because there's indiscriminate killing of snakes. That it happens a lot here. It happens all over the world. Happens in the Caribbean very regularly. Happens back home in Grenada as well. Very sad. But that's something that happens. And one of the things that we're trying to do, and when Johnella tells you the story, you'll understand the whole premise of all of this is that we're trying to make sure that we are not having that illegal wildlife trafficking in general happening on our islands, on the offshore islands, on mainland Antigua. The problem that's happening right now is that departments within the government do not know who are the lead person to actually enforce the wildlife trafficking laws or legislation that's already put in place. When it comes to it said to be put to the police of Antigua and Barbuda, but they said that's not their priority, then we push it to fisheries for the fisheries and marine department. Fisheries is not even responsible for legislation or giving you any fines or anything like that. They're only supposed to report you to the police who's supposed to give you the fine. So we have that problem. And one of the biggest problems when Johnella jumps into talking about the geographical location, especially of Redonda, is that whether or not we have our legislation here in Antigua and Barbuda, the biggest problem is we have neighboring islands. And I'll give you an example. The West Indian whistling duck is protected under the Environmental and Management and Protection Act of Antigua and Barbuda. However, that West Indian whistling duck does not stay only here. It actually travels throughout the islands, throughout the West Indies. And one of those islands that doesn't have the West Indian whistling duck protected and is very close to Antigua would be Guadeloupe. So when it leaves Antigua, flies over to Guadeloupe, they actually hunt the West Indian whistling duck there. Another problem, again, would be the legislation that's put in place for queen conch, right? So when Antigua and Barbuda's stock kind of runs low, they actually go to Guadeloupe to get their stock and bring it back and sell. There's no enforcement, there's no patrols, so you could see where that problem is happening. And I'm glad that Dr. Gibson brought it up that we need to have some type of working group or network within each island, right? So we could actually record some of these things that's happening. Though we know as people and as biologists and as environmentalists who are doing this type of work and are in the field and actively engaging with different people on different scales, right? Though we know this is happening, it is not recorded, right? It is not, no data is being made, right? Most of the funding that we're getting is more for the climate change, right? So it's not going into the little things that could probably protect the species right now, right? To actively protect the species. It's more of let's go into renewable energy, into EVs, well, and those types of things. But we have the legislation here in Antigua and Barbuda, right? And Redonda, right? We just need to actually have that enforcement, have that capacity, build our capacity, and actually get more training on how to actually deal with this situation. And the whole Caribbean, I'm pretty sure, has that same issue as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Josh. So to give you an example of how we at the EAG had to cope with, human expansion in our work, restoring islands and saving species from the brink of expansion. We're just going to tell you about the story of Redonda. All right. So if you haven't heard about Redonda, Redonda is going to be your new favorite offshore island. But however, Redonda, as you can see from this map, is located approximately 56 kilometers or 35 miles southwest from mainland Antigua. And as you can see, Redonda it's situated closer to Nevis and Montserrat than it is to Antigua. So this kind of creates this transboundary effect. So although from the map, logistically, you would think, yes, Redonda should either be a territory for Montserrat or Nevis, but it's the third island, and Antigua and Barbuda is a tri-state island. Despite this, we monitor Redonda, and when we do our monitoring, you might wonder, how do we even get there? Because Redonda is quite remote, so we would have to take a helicopter trip from Antigua to Redonda to do our routine monitoring and conservation work. Okay, so now that we kind of have an idea of where the Redonda is located, how does Redonda even look? Well, during the 1493, when our not so favorite colonizer was rediscovering the Caribbean, this is how Christopher Columbus saw Redonda. As you can see, it's like this big rock in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. You can see that there's a lot of greenery, it's lush. It's bursting with wildlife. You can see the birds are flying high in their numbers. And they said at this time you couldn't walk on Redonda without walking on a bird egg. So that's to give you an idea of how much nesting was happening on this island. And Redonda is only 1 mile long and rises above 300 meters above sea level. All right. So why is Redonda important? As we said, it has a high nesting seabird population on the island. You can find 3 species of boobies that we have there. We have the brown booby, the masked booby, the red-footed booby. Because of this, Redonda is globally recognized as an important bird and biodiversity area and a key biodiversity area. So even for the reptiles, we have critically endangered and endemic reptile species. So endemic means you cannot find them anywhere else on the world, but in one specific location. So we have the Redonda pygmy gecko, the Redonda tree lizard, and the Redonda ground lizard. However, I've described to you what Redonda is supposed to look like, what you're supposed to see. In 2008, this is what we saw. This is the Redonda we could see. As you can see, this island looks like a dry moonscape. It looks like it's dying. If you really look close, there's actually only one tree on the island. And this is because the island was deforested. There was a lot of erosion. The cliffs were crumbling into the sea. And this was due to the negative impacts of invasive alien species on the island. So I should say Redonda is an unpeopled island. People don't live on there. It's just the wildlife. Now you may ask, but wait, how did the invasive alien species get on there in the first place? Well, people, in the late 1800s, we as people were always hustling. We always want to make money, and this has always been our history. So in the late 1800s, an American company decided that they were going to put a guano mine on Redonda. Yes, Redonda was just minding its own business, and they said, well, there are so many nesting activity, and it's been happening for so long that they're going to take advantage of that natural resource, mine it to create fertilizers. So that's what they did. They got 100 to 120 miners. They brought them to the island, and they had to bring everything. So they had to bring us food, water, livestock. So they brought on some goats. They brought all the building materials because Redonda had nothing on it. So they had to bring all these materials to set up the mine. And as we know, rats are great at stowaways. So when they were bringing all these materials, this is where the rats were introduced. However, the mining operation stopped when they realized that the fertilizers and the phosphates were being used in ammunition for World War One. As I said, the miners left behind a huge population of black rats, and they just destroyed the entire ecosystem. They ate everything on the island that they could. And this included our critically endangered reptile species. So this is one of the black rats eating the Redonda ground lizards. And they also preyed on the chicks of the seabirds that were there because they were left vulnerable. So the island literally saw a collapse. Plus, taking into consideration the impacts of the goats, we know goats are grazers. They would just eat everything. And the conditions were so bad in Redonda that when we would go, we would just see bodies of the goats littered on the island because there wasn't a source of water. And things were very desperate. And at this time, the island and the species, they were on the brink of extinction. And if we know anything with invasive species and islands, they are the main cause of extinctions, and islands are hotspots for extinctions. So we said, you know what, all of this is happening. So what could happen if we could remove all the rats and the goats? How would it impact this damaged ecosystem, and will the wildlife recover? So what we did, we put together a team who had to camp on the island for 2 months. And during those 2 months, we started our eradication procedure, and they had to distribute rat bait to every single point that you're seeing on the island. So every 40 meters, and you might ask, why 40 meters? Because everything a rat needs to survive is within a 40 meter radius. So it's church, it's home, it's gym, it's school, everything, gas station, everything is within 30 meters. So they had to do this for 2 months straight to ensure that they got all of the rat population. It was estimated to be approximately 6,000 black rats on the island. And there were so many rats on the island, you can see that they had just put a little bit of bait down during the night, and they just went crazy for it, attacking it, and they came out in their numbers. During the eradication, within 2 weeks, the team detected zero rat activity, and the island has remained invasive mammalian species free since 2017 up to now. So after completing the eradication, we continue to do our biosecurity checks. We installed permanent bait stations, which are just these stations that we put bait in, and detector wax, and we have to replenish them every quarter. And you may ask, what happened to the goats? They got the A-class treatment, and we had to fly them out of Redonda and back to mainland. And this is just to show you a quick glimpse of our work and why our conservation work is so important. But it's kind of ironic because we humans, we were kind of the cause of this destruction, but yet still we were able to remedy, our grave mistakes. So you can see in 2012, when the rats and goats were present, how the island was looking, nothing was going on for it. And 3 years post eradication, you're seeing the vegetation come back, and we saw the whole ecosystem benefits. The invertebrates were coming back. We were starting to see land birds. We were starting to see different species. It was just great, and we really took a passive approach to this. All we did up to this date was just to remove the rats and the goats, and the ecosystem just rebounding by itself. And this is just a testament to nature's resilience. So to protect the work that we did, because conservation is ongoing, in 2023, we declared Redonda and its surrounding seas as a protected area, dubbed the Redonda Ecosystem Reserve. And this is a part of our conservation efforts to protect the work that we did and to ensure that the legacy of Redonda, all the ecosystem benefits, it remains there, present and functioning, not just for us, but also for future generations. So this is just a map showing you the boundary of the protected area. It's extremely large. This area is as big as mainland Antigua. And it's very hard because with that transboundary effect, we can't just think about Antigans alone. We have to consider the people of Montserrat and Nevis and how they use this resource space. So then we're just going to hand it back over to Josh, and he's just going to go over the key takeaways of why this work is so important.
All right, thank you for that, Johnella. So just the key takeaways, especially when you're doing this type of rewilding and actual conservation work and trying to bring back a species from the brink of extinction. Partnership is one of the main things. Johnella probably didn't mention it because we know we're short of time, so she didn't get to go into the full story. But at the end, then you'll actually see a photo of all the partners that are actually helped with this. We had to get a lot of different expertise from different parts of the world, actually, to come in to actually help with this eradication. Okay, it was a big undertaking. Redonda is 1 mile long, right? And it's very treacherous. And as you could see on that map that Johnella was showing, there's some areas that's inaccessible to us, right? So that's one of the main things that you want to take away from that you need different expertise to do different types of things. So while you do have people who are just normal biologists and could actually come out and help, right? You actually need mountaineers to actually scale these treacherous parts of Redonda to actually help with the distribution of the bait. And especially our helicopter company, Calvin Air, they're the biggest ones for that because they helped out a lot. Without that type of help, a helicopter, a lot of the goats in them probably wouldn't have gotten off Redonda alive. So that's something to put in play. Another thing that's probably a little bit extra about partnership is that in the Caribbean, we have the type of expertise here, right, within the Caribbean itself. But the problem is that we're not talking to each other, right? There's a lack of inter-Caribbean communication, right, or inter-island communication. We don't communicate. We usually have these, and I'm not talking bad about anyone, right? We usually have these networks, right? And we usually have these WhatsApp groups, all these things, and then these forums, these conferences that we're having. We usually go to that, meet someone who is an exciting person. That person could probably change the way that you look at the work that you're doing now and probably revamp it to better it, right? However, sometimes that person is so busy with their job, right, and trying to make whatever work they're doing the best that it could be. They don't have time to help you with your work, right? So we're losing that type of expertise in the Caribbean that because we're not actually talking, right, or we don't have enough time to actually give. And sometimes when we do have exchanges are too short because you have to think about the funding that has to go into those things as well. One of the other things that we were looking at, or we have to look at when it comes to conservation on a whole, is try not to look at the short-term gains of doing things. Always look at the long term, right? I think for us, when we're looking at things, we always have this 10-year goal, right? And then we'll revisit it halfway through. Every 5 years, we'll revisit and make sure, look, are we hitting our target? Are we hitting our targets? Are we making sure that this island is protected, that it hasn't been reinvaded? The population is increasing. What else can we do to help the rewilding of this island and help the population grow? Or if they're tipping off a little bit, how can we help them maintain themselves, either whether it is with the food, lack of water, right? Lack of shade, especially in Redonda. As you saw, that one tree, there's probably just a couple trees that probably popped up, but there's a lack of shade as well. And what else can we do to ensure that this island is protected without us being here? Something Johnella didn't mention is that we only visit Redonda three times a year. So every 3 months, we actually go to Redonda. 3 to 4 times a year, we actually go to Redonda. So for a big gap within the year, we're not actually on the island actually seeing what we're doing. So one of the things that we did for a long term, right, the long-term effect, that we put cameras on the island and access points that boats could actually go on. Actually, you can actually see the boats and then moored underwater, so you could identify who is actually coming onto the island or who is actually mooring themselves close to the island. And you're not supposed to, right? Within the laws of Redonda, you're not supposed to come within those waters and moor, or even come onto the island itself. So that's one of the things that you have to think about. And lastly, we all hear it a lot, right? Paper parks, right? A lot of Caribbean islands and a lot of places in general actually just have their protected areas, but it's not managed, right? It's not enforced. There's no enforcement. There's nothing being done. It's only in legislation. It's only in the cabinet. They just push it out. We have a protected area. When you go to that protected area, everyone is doing everything that you're not supposed to do in that protected area. So you're losing that as well. So that's one of the things that we didn't want with Redonda, ensuring that it's not a paper park. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is locally led conservation. You don't want your experts coming in, just eradicating an island and leaving without anybody to actually take on the blunt of that work. Because eradicating an island is easy, but the management of that island, you cannot depend on an outside entity. You need on the ground, in island, people to actually do that work for you. People who are passionate about that and actually want to see that conservation, that hard work that you just did is prolonged for future generation. So that's one of the things that we actually do at the EHE. We actually have locally led conservation. We have these experts coming in. They would train us in what we need to do. They would leave. They will go do their other projects and help other places. But we have that training. We have that knowledge. We have that capacity. We have our capacity built to actually pass that information on and that training on to other people. So these are some of the key takeaways that I hope you got from this presentation. Thank you. I guess any questions, comments, insults, we'll take those.
Okay, John has a question. You can go ahead, John.
Okay, good night. Joshel, I think I picked up that you're Grenadian.
Yes, born and raised.
Ah, right. So, do you think that what y'all did at Redonda, while it would be significantly different, but do you think it's possible to do the same thing with the Grenada dove habitat here?
I love that question. I've been having, so Grenada dove. We've been having a big problem with that since the beginning. Government is one of the biggest problems. I don't know if you knew in 2004, just before Hurricane Ivan, just before Hurricane Ivan, Grenadian government had gotten, I think it was $24 million to actually move the Perseverance habitat, dump to another location to actually help the Grenada dove population. Um, One of the things, if you didn't know that, now you know, right? It's kind of on the wraps. But one of the things that we could do for the Grenada dove is actually invasive species management, just like what we did with Redonda. So you're correct. One of the biggest problems we have is the mongoose population, as you know, in Grenada, right? And that's one of the things that you need to control. And it's not only about just getting rid of the mongoose within the area, it has to be constant because because the Grenada dove nests in the trees, its natural predator is the broad-winged hawk, right? Or if it's a peregrine falcon, right? They will fly to the ground. Any predator that's in the sky, they'll fly to the ground, and that's the problem that we're having with the mongoose actually
Mhm.
taking advantage of them. So yes, I believe something along the lines of maybe a mainland island type of situation, not like what we're doing, but more of a mainland island mix with a rewilding of different areas where we know the Grenada dove has been present within Grenada could be a benefit to helping the population. And also captive breeding could actually be a solution as well for the Grenada dove.
Okay. Love to hear you say that. Problem is, I don't know if you know, you probably do. Um, the habitat has shrunk significantly, especially Mount Hartman. They've sold two-thirds of the land, and I don't know if there's probably one record of a dove being heard, not even seen at Perseverance. So great ideas, but I think the biggest that you did mention is government and invasive species management. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. Mount Hartman is a big problem because our most of the land is already sold to is it the Four Seasons Hotel? That's what's going to be built there, I believe.
I don't, they sold it to a Chinese development. They ceased work now,
Oh,
apparently. So they cleared the land and they built up and they had to stop.
yeah.
And then they sold the other set. I don't know who they sold it to, but they cleared another set close to Clarkscourt Marina.
Yeah, yeah, that's what's going on. And then the other thing, like you said, government has Ministry of Agriculture doesn't get a lot of support and funding because of a lot of things that have been a lot of reporting that has not been being done. So CITES has pulled a lot of their funding. Some of their partners from overseas has pulled funding. They're trying, but I don't think without the government's help and without any local initiative for the Grenada dove, I don't see the Grenada dove population bouncing back from the low numbers it's at this moment. So hopefully that maybe in the future or maybe now because of this presentation, maybe you, John, you could probably jump and get into that field
We're,
and actually recover the Grenada dove. If you
we're
need help,
trying.
just let us know. We're always here for help. There's always people in the Caribbean ready to help.
Appreciate that. We're trying. I have a lecturer that's actively doing research on the dove right now. So and she got funding to do it. So there's still hope, however small.
And that's all you need, just a small bit of hope.
All right, great. Thank you for that, Joshel. Any other questions? If not, there's a comment from Zadie. She's also from Grenada. She says she loves the history lesson because she never thought about how I'm assuming the invasive species got onto the island. So she said the answer was very interesting. So you guys did a great job with that presentation, and thank you for contributing to the Giving Community webinar. So guys,
Thank you for having us.
no problem. So moving on now, guys, the fun is not over yet. So Angelique is gonna take over, and we're going to be speaking about our GYBN Caribbean photo contest that we launched earlier in September. So you can go ahead, Angelique.
Yes, thank you, Tuita. Right. So recently we started our Caribbean photo contest in celebration of World Animal Day, and we've had a ton of great selections. And in the chat, what I'll do is send a poll for you guys to vote which you think is the best. So you can start voting now. You just sent it there. And additionally with that, we also have some honorary mentions.
Okay, so yeah,
Yes, so these are the
photos.
main ones.
Yeah.
So you guys can vote for which one you think is the best, clicking the link below.
Right. So we'll just give you like 2-3 minutes to vote. And in the meantime, as she mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing the honorary mentions. So these are just photos that have been taken from numerous amounts of our Giving Caribbean members. So here we have a picture from Zadie, one from Chauncey in the middle, and one from John. And Angelique referred to this particular slide as a snake party earlier. So it's just a good amount of us with different snakes that we've worked with. So there's Angelique, Felicia, Bianca, and myself. I'm holding the Antiguan racer. Angelique, if you know what snake you're holding, you can indicate.
I think I
Yeah,
have the biggest snake, or is Felicia?
yeah.
Guys, who do you think has the biggest snake? Mine wrap up in my arm like chow mein. Wow.
All right. So I'm gonna just go back to the photos and we're gonna check the poll now. So just checking in, has everyone finished voting? If you are, just send a thumbs up. Right? Well, it seems like everybody is finished. So I'm gonna give it like 30 more seconds and then announce the winner. Um, Typically the prize that we usually give is bragging rights. So if you do win between Diana, Travis, and Jessica, you will receive bragging rights in the giving group as well as your other social media platforms. And we will post the winning photo on the Giving Caribbean story. All right, so is everybody ready? Chauncey said drum roll, so she's ready for sure. So,
Let's get a drum roll.
yeah,
I know who the winner is.
in third place, we have Jessica Calendar with 5 votes. So that means it's between Diana and Travis. Who y'all think is gonna win?
Looking like
I see
Diana.
Travis sending his hat, so he's definitely passionate. All right, so first place with 8 votes, we have Diana Lopez. Travis got 7 votes, and Jessica came third with 5 votes. So thank you guys, and congratulations, Diana. Thank you also, Jessica and Travis, for participating. This meant a lot to us because we were very excited to see what submissions we got. So just to wrap up now. So yeah.
Hello, guys. I'm gonna step in for a bit here. I'm Antia. I'm one of the coordinators for GYBN Caribbean. So we're gonna give a special prize to Diana. Diana, you're gonna be fast-tracked to be a full member of GYBN Caribbean. So that's a bit of a thank you for participating. And yeah, so it's no longer just bragging rights. You're gonna be fast-tracked to the full membership crew. I'll reach out to you a bit later in the evening and get you involved in the WhatsApp group chat.
All right. So congratulations again, Diana. That's a very big accomplishment. So with that, over now, we would like to say thank you to everyone that came out to support us tonight. Thank you to all the presenters. All your presentations were insightful and amazing. I'm really glad that there was high participation and everyone had questions. Right now, Angelique has posted all the social media pages in the chat, so you can take a look at those. If you want to join the community or go on the YouTube and see past webinars, we have more from earlier in the year and last year as well. And also she sent the registration link. So if you are interested in becoming a GYBN Caribbean member, you can click the link and read up more about the group, as well as follow us on social media for more updates in the future. So thank you to everyone. It means a lot to have our small community growing, and this was definitely an amazing evening. Thank you to Angelique for your assistance, and thank you for everybody for coming out tonight.
Thank you for everyone in the team, and the biggest thanks goes towards the participants of the session, for all those who were here and took your time, as well as to you panelists. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
everyone.